You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Chris Vermeulen. His website is thegoldenoilguy.com. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Hey, thanks, Jim. Thanks for having me.
Well, what has changed the most since we chatted a little while ago?
Yeah, the last time we were talking, we had seen the U.S. dollar. It had been a pretty sharp decline for several weeks, and I was pointing out how it was getting down to a critical support zone and how I was expecting the U.S. dollar to find a support level here and have a bounce that would probably last a few weeks and kind of give that U.S. dollar one last surge back up to test the recent highs back in early March. And, of course, the weaker U.S. dollar that we saw the last couple months here, we talked about some plays that we've done, which is getting long Russia, because obviously a weak dollar helps commodities. And anything related to commodities, Russia is very heavily balanced with crude oil. So as the U.S. dollar was falling the last few months, we got long Russia, crude oil, we got long live cattle, and those were all moving up in favor. And of course, as the U.S. dollar came down to this key support zone, we moved out of those positions, and actually just in the last week and a half, pretty much the day before the dollar bottomed, I got long the U.S. dollar index. And of course, we've seen a very nice bounce off this critical support level. And this bounce in the U.S. dollar has now turned commodities down. And the big picture for commodities and the U.S. dollar, just to kind of paint the big picture here, is the U.S. dollar, I think, is in the final weeks or possibly month or two of topping out here. And eventually the U.S. dollar is either going to just kind of flatline or it's going to start to lose some value. And when it does that, we're going to see commodities in general start to bottom and put in these major basing patterns, which many commodities have already started. And we're going to see the commodity market start to rise and go into a full-fledged bull market. And that's just kind of the way the financial cycles move. The stock market is way overbought. It is getting into the late stages of a bull market, and usually that's when commodities, physical assets, start to become favored. So that's what we're looking for in the long run. But in the short haul here, weaker commodity prices, rising dollar looking forward a couple of weeks is kind of the picture.
We're near the end of the month. Would we have a chance of seeing the traditional sell in May go away?
Yeah, today's a pretty big down day in the equities market. We've seen quite a bit of consolidation going on for the last really couple weeks here. We've just been grinding at these new highs, depending on the index you're looking at. The Russell 2000, the NASDAQ, both of those have fairly bearish chart patterns, while the large caps, which is the SP 500 and the Dow, they've got a little bit more bullish price pattern that they have going on, that we've seen those indexes move to new highs, and they're having a sharp pullback today, but that's what happens in a bull market. We see the market rally, and then you see these really strong drops in the market, and then you see the market just continue up rallying again. It's just the way bull markets try and buck you out of the market. They have big waves of selling that happen very quickly, one or two down days, and then they just resume and keep on going. So the big question here is, because we have the big caps are showing strength, the small caps and leaders, which are the technology, are showing weakness. So you put them together, we've got a fairly neutral market right here. And if we look at the big board, the NYSE, which are the big brand name stocks that hedge funds, mutual funds, all those funds carry, the average investor dumps their money in, that is in a rising wedge that is very bearish. It's still in an uptrend, but if we have another big down day like today, for just one or two more down days like today, and that is going to trigger, I think, a massive wave of selling, and we could see that big dump here, going into the end of the month, and see it continue on for actually several weeks after that.
And that would fit into the traditional sell in May, go away pattern.
Yeah, it would. It catch right at the end. It would probably catch everybody off guard, because a lot of people generally anticipate it to happen sometime, the first week or two of May, not the last 3 or 4 days. So, it's a great way that it could catch a lot of people off guard for sure.
What's happening with Japan?
Japan, we've seen really nice big money moving into Japan, and those indexes have been rising very steadily since pretty much January of the year. It's up big. If you look at the EWJ, which is the Japan ETF, it's very close to its all-time highs. Obviously, equities in general are pulling back today, but it's been on a very strong uptrend and just continues to march higher. Now, overall, the momentum in Japan, Shanghai, all those major indexes are very bullish. They've painted some very strong pictures to the upside, where we could see probably another 25% rally in those indexes going forward here, which would really buck the trend of what we're seeing, what I think we're going to see in the U.S. equities.
Some people have suggested that China in October will announce that it's going to the gold standard. And after all, China over the last 3 or 4 years has been acquiring literally every physical scrap of gold they can lay their hands on. Plus, they're encouraging their citizens to do the very same thing. Any chance that's going to be the case?
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see what happens. You know, it makes good sense. Why not have a currency backed with an asset? It's been proven that it works. It actually puts value to your paper dollars. And, you know, if the fact that they're telling, you know, citizens to purchase gold is a very good telltale sign that obviously they want their citizens to become wealthy, because they probably expect the price of gold to rally. So they, you know, what is happening, what they're doing seems to make sense. And I think it would be probably a great idea. And if they do it, we're probably going to see a chain reaction of other countries start to really think through, do we want to do this too? And it could start a chain reaction of other countries wanting to get on a gold standard. And it could really change the way the currency markets move going forward.
Would it also be a bold move for China to make the yuan the world reserve currency?
Yeah, you know what? I got a feeling it's going to probably eventually be the world currency. It just seems to make sense the way things are going with the U.S. dollar, the Fed, how everything is just kind of imploding with debt. You just can't service the way the U.S. dollar is going, and you really need a currency to have asset behind it. You can't just print off more zeros and just keep feeding people money. It just doesn't work that way. If there was a global currency backed with an asset that actually has value, that's kind of that would be it. That would be the thing to go to. Everything would be fairly priced, and you know that would be the way I think it would work well in the long run.
Russia and China seem to be really cozying up. Is this going to push them even closer together?
It definitely could. You know, we could see those two countries become very close, and of course, you know, that's not good for the states. They just don't seem to work well together. It's going to be very interesting how the U.S. is going to deal with that if it happens, because there's probably going to be some pretty serious negotiations going on with, you know, the U.S. likes to get their nose into things and kind of tell people what to do. So they're not going to like that if that happens. It seems like those two countries are getting very close together, and they're, you know, for all we know, they're planning, you know, to really partner up in a big way going forward.
Well, I mean, they have their own World Reserve Bank now to challenge the IMF.
Right, yeah.
The BRIC countries getting together, that would include Brazil and India.
Mm-hmm.
Although I don't know how well the Brazilian economy's been doing, but India seems to make strides that most people over on this side of the water ignore, but they're certainly not ignoring it there with a middle class that's growing daily.
Yeah, India is really growing, definitely, when it comes to that.
We'll have more with Chris Vermeulen right after this.
More and more people are looking to the internet for intelligent, riveting, and thought-provoking interviews. To advertise on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com, call 604-699-8600, 604-699-8600.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Chris Vermeulen. His website is thegoldandoilguy.com. Chris, what's going to happen to crude?
Crude oil going forward here, I think we are going to see it consolidate for probably a couple of weeks, possibly a couple of months, but overall the picture is painted to be very bullish in the long run. We just need the U.S. dollar here to kind of have this final little bounce and kind of start to top out, and I think we're going to see crude oil really have a nice run all the way back up to the potential $75, $80 per barrel, which is what the technical analysis of the charts, the supply and demand, is kind of starting to shift. And of course, we've seen a lot of things kind of unfold quickly in the oil industry. You know, if we were to compare the drop in oil price that we've seen in 2014 and to today, to the 2008-2009 crash in oil, you know, if you look at the U.S. rig counts, we saw in 2008 when oil plummeted, rig counts in the U.S. dropped about 60%. And what we've seen currently today, since oil topped out there in 2014, we've seen the rig counts drop again about 60%. So both markets, the timing, the way they've unfolded, the length of time that they've been selling off, and how quickly the oil rigs have capped off their wells, closed them down, it's really starting to paint the picture that we're going to eventually have this, you know, we've got a glut of oil that's kind of getting worked out of the system, but once that is gone, we're going to have a very strong demand in crude oil prices, and we're going to see, I think something very similar to 2009, where we're going to see just eventually crude oil just pop and rally, and it could rally for several months and gain a lot of value, and we could see crude oil right back up to the $75, $80 level, you know, much sooner than people expect. The fact that rigs have been closing this quickly is a great sign that we're going to see crude oil put a bottom in, or if it hasn't already put a bottom in, we're going to see it rally a lot sooner than people think.
Have people been laid off long enough that they've found something else to do, or are the skilled people who have lost their jobs just sitting there waiting to come back right away?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would probably think there's a large group of people who worked in the oil industry who have now been laid off again. You know, if they've been in the industry a long time, they're probably sick and tired of getting laid off. And, you know, this could be the final straw for a lot of workers saying, I'm moving on, I'm going to something else. I don't want to have a job where, you know, the price of commodity falls and in 4 months or 3 months I lose my job. So there's going to be probably a lot of trouble getting, you know, all these rigs opened up again and running and staffed with the right people. I think there's going to be some serious employment issues, and it's going to really drag out the opening process for a lot of plants.
Yeah, I heard some exploration engineers, the people at the tip of the spear, they've already cast their eyes to other markets saying, well, it's too risky here because Alberta oil is so expensive to produce. They'll be the last to come back online.
Yeah. That makes sense, and you know it's really tough. Like the only companies that I think are really going to thrive and take off big in this next kind of rally in crude oil are going to be the companies, big and small, that whichever ones have the lowest cost to extract the oil. And you know there's so many little energy companies out there that have great properties that are working on open up drilling and getting access to oil and gas. And the ones that are really going to be primed to have huge gains here in the next crude oil rally are going to be these companies that have the lower cost, because, we're still going to be months before we get back up to the $75, $80 per barrel level at best. And, these companies, if some of these companies have got $85 just to produce a barrel, where if you can find some of these other smaller cap companies that have a lower cost that, say, get into shale and don't have to frack and get really low cost, production, then you're going to be set for those companies to really thrive and start to excel and have high margins. And investors are going to flood, I think, to those companies.
And there's a new competitor in town. I don't know how serious of a competitor it'll be for people, but they've found a way to convert plastic back to crude. And I'm saying recovered plastic, like all this plastic that gathers on the beach, or perhaps that big ocean mat of plastic bottles and so on in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. That could be cheaply converted back to crude oil and then turned into products of whatever crude oil makes. And that's something that hasn't been a big player up until now. And I don't know how big of a factor that might be.
Yeah, you know what? I heard something about it. I don't know much about that, but it's an interesting concept. It would be interesting to know, if they have a ton of plastic or 10 tons of plastic, how much oil do they get out of it? How much energy do they consume to create oil? It's almost like the ethanol thing. You burn more energy trying to make ethanol than it's worth actually, making and selling. It's ridiculous. It's so heavily subsidized. I'm not sure how the whole plastic to crude oil thing would work out, but it would be definitely interesting to look into.
Yeah, and again, like you said, the cost factor is the big bugaboo.
Yeah.
Although, we've been wondering what to do with that big, massive Rhode Island plastic in the middle of the ocean. This could be the solution.
Well, exactly. If they could find a way to get rid of pollution in the oceans and reuse it, that would be phenomenal. Whatever company does that is going to have headline news. They're going to have such a big following. There's so many people that want to, save the planet. Everybody does, but there's a very powerful group and very active groups out there that want to help. And if somebody was to start this and prove that it's viable, it would just explode. Everybody would want to invest in it. Who doesn't want to save the planet? So,
well, right now, all I've heard is, small operations that basically would be backing charities. The charities would get the proceeds. So right now, they're not doing it for profit for themselves, but to help out a charity, because the amount of money they're talking about isn't that big. But you could see on a major industrial scale how that could turn into something that big companies would be interested in.
Yeah, for sure.
Chris, anything else you wanted to throw into the basket today?
Not really. We've kind of covered the main thing. The real kind of picture to paint here is that the U.S. dollar is strengthening probably for a couple more weeks. Commodities are likely to be soft for a couple more weeks. And then I think we're going to see things have a big reverse. There's natural gas, crude oil, gold and silver. They've all been kind of carving out these slow bases. They're trying to create a bottom. And once this U.S. dollar puts the top in and starts to fall, we're going to see commodities in general, including, cotton and wheat. And there's a lot of live cattle. A lot of commodities are building this base, and we're going to eventually see commodity prices start to rise. And we're going to see probably equities get softer and start to have more distribution selling and probably start to pull back.
Chris, thanks a lot for chatting with us.
Hey, I appreciate it. And thanks for having me on the show, Jim.
My guest has been Chris Vermeulen. His website is thegoldandoilguy.com. You're listening to HowStreet.com radio. Find us on Twitter at Talk Digital Net. Our popular YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Comments for the show can be sent to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.